It was a cold November morning in 1983 when a body was discovered inside a van parked along a quiet stretch of California road. Nobody knew her story yet. Nobody knew her name. But for 43 years, Dorothy "Toby" Tate would wait in the silence of an unsolved case, waiting for someone to finally speak her name out loud and say, "We found them." Dorothy "Toby" Tate was the kind of woman people remembered. She had a nickname, Toby, the kind of name that suggests warmth, personality, someone who left an impression on the people lucky enough to know her. She lived in San Luis Obispo County, California, a stretch of coastline that sits between Los Angeles and San Francisco, the kind of place that looks postcard perfect on the surface: rolling hills, Pacific breezes, small town charm. It's the sort of place where terrible things aren't supposed to happen. But they do. They always do. In 1983, the world was a different place. There were no smartphones, no surveillance cameras on every corner, no digital footprints to follow. If you wanted to disappear after committing a crime, California to Texas was a long, anonymous road with very few ways to trace it. And for two men, that road would become their shield for decades. November 15, 1983, investigators responded to a scene that would haunt the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office for the next 4 decades. Inside a van, they found Toby Tate. She had been shot to death. The details of what exactly led to that moment, what her final hours looked like, whether she knew her killers, whether she saw it coming, those details have been buried by time. But the evidence left behind told a story. Not a complete one, not yet, but enough of one to matter. At the scene, detectives collected what they had: fingerprints on a soda can, just a simple, ordinary soda can, the kind of everyday object no one thinks twice about touching. But a fingerprint is a fingerprint. It doesn't lie, it doesn't fade from a database the way memories fade from the minds of witnesses. They also collected blood evidence, DNA. In 1983, the science to fully exploit that DNA didn't exist yet, not in any meaningful investigative capacity, so the evidence was preserved, filed away, and the case went cold. Years passed, then decades. Toby Tate became a name in a file, one of those unsolved cases that detectives quietly carry with them, the ones that show up in quiet moments, the ones that remind you why the work matters. But here's the thing about cold cases: the evidence doesn't age the way justice does. The blood they collected in 1983 still held its secrets. The fingerprints were still there, sharp and undeniable, and the world around that evidence was changing fast. When investigators revisited the Tate case, armed with modern forensic technology and a determination to give this woman her justice, they started with what they had always had. The fingerprints on that soda can were run through updated databases, and they got a hit. A man named Charly Sneed, a resident of Texas at the time the case was being reinvestigated. Suddenly, a name attached itself to a 40-year-old crime scene. But detectives didn't stop there, because in the 21st century there's a tool that has quietly revolutionized cold case investigations across the country: forensic genealogy. It's the same science that helped crack the Golden State Killer case, the process of building family trees from DNA evidence, tracing genetic relatives through public genealogy databases, and working backwards until a name emerges. It's painstaking work. It takes time, but it works. And it worked here. The DNA from the blood evidence at the scene pointed investigators toward a second man, Stephen Richard Hardy, also a resident of Texas. 2 men, 1 crime scene, 1 dead woman in a van in California. The pieces were starting to form a picture. Investigators began building their case. They examined not just the forensic evidence, but the behavior that followed the murder. And this is where the story takes a turn that tells you everything you need to know about what kind of crime this really was. Property belonging to Toby Tate, her belongings, things that were hers, was later pawned in California after her death. Someone had taken what little she had and traded it for cash. The sheriff's office concluded that the evidence indicated the crime was likely committed during a burglary or theft. Toby Tate wasn't targeted for who she was. She was, in the coldest and most devastating reading of the evidence, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Two men who wanted what she had, and they took everything. Now here is where the story pivots into something that sits uncomfortably between justice and frustration. Because by the time investigators had built their case, by the time they had fingerprints, DNA, forensic genealogy, pawned property, a coherent and damning narrative, both Charly Sneed and Stephen Richard Hardy were already dead. The men who shot Toby Tate and pawned her belongings and drove away into the long anonymity of the Texas horizon had already met their own ends before the law could formally meet them. The San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office submitted their findings to the District Attorney's Office. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and determined that probable cause existed, that had these men been alive, there would have been enough to charge them, enough to put them in front of a jury, enough to convict. But they weren't alive, and the law has limits. The case was officially closed and labeled exceptionally cleared. In law enforcement terminology, that phrase means the case is solved, the perpetrators have been identified beyond a reasonable doubt, but prosecution is impossible due to circumstances outside investigators' control. It is, in many ways, the best and worst possible outcome at the same time. For the family of Dorothy Toby Tate, if they are still out there, if they have carried this weight across 43 years of not knowing, the announcement in January 2026 would have arrived like a complicated kind of relief, the kind that answers one question and leaves another aching. You know who did it, you know why, but you will never see them walk into a courtroom. You will never hear a verdict read aloud. The men who took Toby from you took something else with them when they died, the chance for the world to formally hold them accountable. And yet, there is something here. Detectives didn't let her go. In a world drowning in new crimes, new cases, new urgency, someone kept pulling that file. Someone submitted that DNA. Someone ran those fingerprints one more time. Someone believed that 43 years of silence didn't mean 43 years of giving up. Dorothy Toby Tate was found in a van on a November morning, alone in a county that looked like a postcard. She deserved better than that morning. She deserved better than the men who crossed her path. But she also got this: detectives who refused to forget her, science that finally caught up with the truth, and a case that is now closed after 40 decades. Her name was Dorothy. They called her Toby, and now, at last, the world knows what happened to her.